specialist here at the Dill Center. This is the first of our 10-part learning series on the science of reading. These learning opportunities are designed to take you on a science of reading journey with experts from around the country. Throughout this year, we will explore topics around oral language development, the phonological processing system, orthography, morphology, fluency, comprehension, and reading difficulties. Our goal is to show you how science has proven the brain learns to read and provide you with practical application to improve your knowledge, instruction, which will ultimately lead to student achievement. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions or comments, our team will be monitoring the chat, so please feel free to use the chat box and the reaction tools. We'd love to hear from you. I have some exciting news to share with everyone. The Dill Center is now offering continuing education units for all attending our professional learning events. Everyone is eligible for CEU credit. However, there are certain conditions that must be met in order to receive these credits. At the end of each virtual event, we will put a link to the survey in the chat box. And in order to receive CEU credit, a survey must be completed and submitted at the end of the event. And more information will be provided at the conclusion of tonight's webinar. Dr. Paulson, did you want to go ahead and do your poll, or do you want me to do mine?
I think I'm going to, so if that's the poll that I sent you, then I'm going to do that in a couple slides.
Okay, great. All righty, well tonight it is my privilege to introduce the guest speaker, Dr. Lucy Hart Paulson. Dr. Paulson is a literacy specialist, author, and speech language pathologist with many years of experience working with educators, young children, and families in the public schools, Head Start, and private clinics. She was a tenured faculty member teaching and researching in areas of language and literacy development and disorders. Dr. Paulson has provided professional development for a variety of audiences across the United States and internationally. Lucy is the lead author of the Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling for Early Childhood Educators, also known as LETTERS, Building Early Literacy and Language Skills, which is a resource and activity guide for young children, and also the author of Good Talking Words, a social communication skill program for preschool and kindergarten. Dr. Paulson, thank you for joining us tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Amy, through the Dill Center for organizing this experience. And as the kickoff, I feel quite honored to have this opportunity to share this time with you. And I thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. And thank you for your dedication and the commitment that you have, taking time out of your busy day after working with students all day and now joining us for this experience. So what I hope we're able to do tonight is have a little bit of fun, deepen what you know about oral language, and maybe take away a few little things that you can do with your friends the next day. So as Amy said, I'm Lucy Hart Paulson as a speech therapist and had a lot of interactions across my career. I spent most of my career in Montana. This is where I will say I'm from Montana. But here's what happened. 3 years ago, I had a grandbaby, so I had to move to Central Oregon. And now my view, instead of the mountains of Montana, I get to look at the Cascades, and this is a little bit of the view that I have from where I get to live. And so now in my life, I have a 3-year-old granddaughter. Her name is Etta, and she is in the throes of learning language. She's in the throes of learning about what print is and how print works. And this spring, she had a little baby brother. Place. Name is Ellis. So with Etta and Ellis in this little family, and they live about 10 miles away from me, I am in my happy place. Etta and Ellis, I have 2 E's in a pod. And then, so my husband and I, we have 2 daughters. And from Montana, they both moved to Oregon, so we did have to follow. And this summer, our other daughter had our third grandson, and he lives about 2 hours away from where I live. And he now is a few months old. So for those of you working across all of those age bands, infants and toddlers into preschoolers, and then the experience that I have in working in elementary grade, I hope that there are some things that we share today that are going to match up with what you already know and deepen your understanding of what this very important construct is of oral language. So we're going to talk about words, and more words, those oral language foundation pieces that are so important for literacy learning. So our time together, here's what we're going to do in the 2-hour time period that we have. We have a chat box, and thank you to every one of you who have entered in who you are and what you get to do. I have a little activity coming up to just get a general sense of all of that as well. So we have a chat box, which you figured out, and I have one activity. We're going to break up into groups and have a little bit of a discussion. We have a poll, so when you see this icon on a slide, then you know we're going to have a poll that we'll be able to do. There are reactions that we have, so they're in a couple of places. So let's try this. So look at the icon. If you see the icon that looks like these two people, open up that's where the participants are, and you open that up, and there are a number of icons that are down there where you could say yes or no, and you can thumbs up and thumbs down. So let's see if y'all can say yes. If you found that yes icon. Oh, green checks, I see a lot of them. Great. Good. And then if you hit the icon, and I'm not seeing that one on there. So we have the yes and the no. Go, there it is. If you hit that icon where that looks like this reaction with the smiley face, then that image will come up where your picture is. Great. Okay, and then there is one other element that we're going to do, and this is an additional element to Zoom. And along with the handout that Amy posted for you, there was another page that is, we're going to call those the key concepts. So it's a graphic organizer for you to have where you can actually write down, my intent, I hope, is that you write down some of those key points that we're going to talk about. Do you know that in order to help your own learning and understanding, if you physically write something down, it's going to be a deeper and better learning for you. So that is what that key concept catcher, the key concept, looks like, our graphic organizer. Okay, so let's launch to a poll. And what I'd like to know is who is all with us? What is your job? What's your role? As a teacher, an early care and education provider, as a community state agency employees, some other service provider, parent, and then also what are the ages of the children that you get to engage with? So here's that poll. You should see it on your screen now. So what's your role? And it's a multiple choice. So if you have more than one role, you surely are able to add that, select more than one. Lots of teachers, lots of early care providers, some other service providers, parents, grandparents. Okay, we have almost a little more than 70% logging on. Oh, getting up to 80. Let's get a few more respondents and then I'll share with you who's with us tonight. Okay, so here's what the results are. A lot of teachers. You guys have superpowers teaching. You make a really important difference. You early care and education providers, oh my goodness, what an important role you have. superpowers, and community state agents, others, and parents. Thank you so much for joining us, taking this time out of your day. And there are almost a third of sorts of those of you working with infants and toddlers, those of you working with preschoolers, and those of you working in the those early graders. All right, so let me just get a little check. Did that poll go away? This is one thing that I have not figured out in Zoom what it really looks like for you, but I have learned that there are some things I do have to do to make it go away. Okay, so here's another poll that I would like you to respond to. I have 3 questions. These are queries just to get a measure of where you are in your perceptions, your understanding about oral language. And so I'm going to launch this poll. One question is related about how we talk to kids and what self-talk and parallel talk are. One is related to a statement about learning. And one is related to the age range that children have developed a pretty significant amount of oral language. When does that happen? Okay, so here is this poll. So 3 queries for you that I have. And I'll give you a few moments to go through and read those queries and then see what you think. Lots of thinking, getting close to a lot of you having responses in. Thank you. Gonna give you a few more moments. Those of you who are just joining us, we're in the middle of a poll, so you should have a poll coming up in your Zoom. Okay, a few more moments. Need a few more respondents. All right, so let's take a quick look at this. I'm going to share the results with you. And these are some things that we're going to talk about today. And one of the things that we know that is a pillar of learning, this is a slide that I have coming up in our conversation. They're pillars of learning, and one that we know is immediate feedback on what it is that we have been asked to respond to. And the first one, what statement is true about learning? Oral language and reading develop with exposure? Nope. Reading is one of those things that must be taught. Oral language and reading both must be intentionally taught. Oral language, where our brains are wired to learn oral language, but our brains are not. C, that's the correct one, and that was the majority of what your responses were. Oral language develops with exposure. You talk to little kids and they learn how to talk. But reading develops because of our intentionality in teaching it. Reading must be taught. And then the last one, oral language, must be intentionally taught, and reading develops with exposure. Nope, just the opposite. All right, well, good work. The second one, what age do children typically, are they typically able to say most of the sounds correctly and use grammatically correct sentences? And that is as they enter kindergarten and into first grade. So by the time children are about 5-ish or so, 5.5 or so, they have developed about 90% of the structures of oral language. And that is when we start teaching and tuning into very significantly what literacy instruction involves. All right, and then self-talk, when an adult is talking to children, what is the difference between self-talk and parallel talk? And so A is the correct answer. And self-talk describes what I'm doing. I'm going to model this activity for you, or this skill set for you, and then I'm going to let you do it. And when I let you do it, as my little friend, I am going to describe what you do. That is parallel talk. So that is a really valuable strategy to use that we'll talk a little bit more about. All right, so thank you so much for your responses to those. We have a couple more polls as we move through this process. Okay, so our job, all of our jobs in our educational kind of realm, is to deepen our understanding of the processes that are involved in children's learning so that we can do our best job possible. And once again, thank you so much for what it is that you do, for your dedication and your commitment to making a really important difference in the lives of children. So here's what we're going to chat about in our time together. We're going to describe what oral language is, because in order to know how oral language is developing, we have to know what those structures are, and then talk about those stages of development across those earliest years into the early elementary grade years. We're also going to talk about the oral language foundations that are so important for children as they begin to learn about written language. And that happens really early in young children's experiences when they have those right kinds of exposures. And then I'm going to share some strategies that you can use, probably ones that you're already using, and maybe making just a little bit more intentional. Those strategies we use to build oral language development in the friends in our care, and particularly those ones that are going to facilitate literacy learning. So how does all that sound? Sound like a deal? And it looks like Someone has posted the handouts for you if you didn't see those in the email in the chat box. So thank you for sharing those. All right, so the PowerPoint slides are the handout, and then a second handout is that graphic organizer. So our topics today, we're going to talk about why words are so important for brain development. Our second topic is going to be about what's in a word, so what the structures of oral language are and how oral language develops, and then talk about some word building strategies for language and literacy learning. All right, so first steps to literacy. Particularly, this is focused on you all who are working in early Head Start or early care and education kinds of contexts where you get to work with those little itty bitties. Infants begin to learn about spoken language when they hear the words around them, when they hear you talking to them. You talk to them and you laugh with them and you sing with them. Your words are really important. And then as they turn into preschoolers, young children begin to understand what written language is because they see written language in their environment and they hear the words that are around them as you read stories to them. Actually, you should be reading stories when they're really little as well, even at that infant level. And they see the symbols in their environment and they begin to key into those. And then those preschoolers turn into early graders. And those early language foundations and exposures that they have are really important foundations for literacy development. And they set the stage for helping children learn to read and to write. So that's kind of an overall arching piece. And here are some statistics that I want to share with you about brain development. Think about this, from birth to age 3, all of you, the folks that are working with those infants and toddlers, there are between 700 and 1,000 additional neural connections made for every second of a baby's life, toddler's life, making 700 to 1,000 new connections. It's a phenomenal statistic. And there's an incredibly complex circuitry in our brains. And that is what creates the architecture of our brain that then creates the opportunity and the development of the functioning of our memory, of our emotion, of our behavior, our motor skills, our language, all of those really important learning foundations that we have. Here's a new word, connectomy. You say it. We can say it on our arm, connectomy. You say it. Now, that's how I have learned to say it. I'm not sure if that's correct or not. This is a new word to me. It might be connectome because it is connected to the genome project. And here's what the connectomy or connectome, whichever dialect you want to use, has identified for us. There's this interconnected wiring. And think about this, 10,000 connections per neurons. And we have 100 billion neurons in our brains with 10,000 connections among each one of those. And it's what makes us who we are, how we think, and how we behave. And this is an example of a brain functioning. Look at all the interconnected nature and all of the activity that is taking place on your brain. So take your right hand, put it on your right side of your brain. That is an image of the right side. That's where a lot of emotion and a lot of creativity and a lot of rhythm are taking place. Now take your left hand, put it on your left side of your brain. That is where oral language sites are. Those are the major sites for oral language development, but all of your brain is used. And then when you have good, strong foundations in oral language, this is the site where then reading and writing can be mapped onto those oral language regions in your brain that have been growing and developing. And you look at what's happening across the preschool years into the early elementary years. And you can add another image to that of what's going on with infants and toddlers. Their brains are growing, their skulls are getting bigger, and there are more and more and more connections. And here's how big those connections can be. 10,000 times 100 billion. I don't even know what cajillion number that is, but it is just phenomenal, the complexity of how our brains grow and develop. And the things that you do with your little friends are so, so important in helping them build really powerful connections. Here's another slide or image that I love to share. And this is about neural connectivity. And you think about that explosion of neural connections that is taking place in the first 3 years. But here's a challenge. It's way too much. There's too many connections that are happening. And through a process of synaptic pruning, cutting back, kind of like what we do in our gardens when we cut back on certain things, then what young brains do with good experiences and good exposures, their brains learn to prune away those extra neural connections that aren't very strong or aren't very productive, and they weed out those weaker ones and fine-tune other ones into specific or specialized functions. So a young children's brain does not learn language in a passive state. You're just sitting back and watching, but young brains need an environment of social interaction. Social is a key element, and social responsiveness. So look at across those time periods. At 36 weeks gestation, before babies are born, you can see neural connections beginning to happen. There's a lot of auditory connection that is taking place with babies hearing the syllables and the rhythm patterns of how language sounds. Songs that babies have been exposed to before they are born are songs in that rhythm pattern that they recognize as pretty young infants. And then a newborn baby's brain, look at those neural connections. 3 months of age, there's a lot of connections that have taken place, but look at the difference between a 3-month-old and a 6-month-old. And you know what starts happening at about 6 months? We're going to talk about it, but holy cow, look at how thick those are. And by the time children are 2, thicker and thicker. And you think about 2-year-olds, toddlers, 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds, how does their behavior respond? They're pretty erratic, right? They can be up and down. You have the terrible 2s. There's probably a reason for that, because their brains are not very well organized. And look at the difference between a 2-year-old's brain and a 4-year-old's brain. The 4-year-old's brain is becoming much more organized. And we see that in children's behavior. And then those 4-year-olds turn into 6-year-olds. And again, there's another layer of organization so that those synaptic patterns and pathways are becoming stronger, the ones that are valuable, the ones that children are engaging with are becoming stronger. And that's a really important element. The patterns that children are behaving or engaging with are being reinforced, and that's how their brains are developing. So a really important sense of why it is that toddlers and that 1- and 2-year-olds don't know how to share, because their brains are really getting cluttered, and there's a whole lot of work that they need to do in being able to organize their brain structures. All right, here's another piece. Brain processing speed, or how quickly you're able to understand something that is said to you. So how quickly you're able to understand a word that you know, that has become familiar and what makes sense to you. And if you need to work hard at recognizing a word that you've already learned, then you're going to miss those next following words. I got to spend a chunk of, I was on sabbatical a few years ago, and I was teaching at the University of Montana, and I was in Australia and in New Zealand. And in New Zealand, they have a different dialect than I am familiar with. And someone said that something was deed. And then they went on talking about something, and deed, I thought, deed, what is that? And I missed the next several sentences of what they said because I was trying to figure out what is deed, and then realized, oh, they don't have any short E sounds in the Australian dialect, and they just have long E sounds. So what was it that they talked about? Something was dead, and they were talking about their cell phone. Their cell phone is deed. That is not recognizing a word that I knew very rapidly, and it impacted what my understanding was through the rest of what was said. And here's a key point. Repetition is really, really important in young children's lives. They need to hear us say the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over. How many of you have that sense in working with little kids? They need to hear things lots and lots and lots of times. Okay, so here's a very cool thing about oral language and about how our brains on the left side are wired. And it's called statistical learning. You say it. Statistical learning. And I think I skipped, no, but there was something coming up. Okay, so our brains are wired to figure out what patterns are. And they figure out what statistical patterns are across words. How many of you have heard a little friend say, I go to the park? That happened to me this weekend when I got to talk to my granddaughter on the phone, and she said, Grandma, I go to the pumpkin patch. And it made me giggle. I can promise you that in her life, no one has ever modeled for her the word goed. We've always said go, and we've always say went. We've never goed anywhere. It is such a great illustration of her brain and our little friend's brains in that statistical learning pattern where they are figuring out how language works. And she has learned that when you talk about something that already happened, that there's this thing you have to add on to the end of that word, this ed ending as we know it, and she is displaying that. And so what we know is that the most of language learning is implicit. That goes on in that subconscious nature in the background while we are engaged in other primary tasks. Here's an example for your own statistical learning. Here's a word, accelerate. You say it. Accelerate. Where is the stress pattern in accelerate? Accelerate. Whoops, I better get 4 fingers up there. Accelerate. If you call your dog accelerate, 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 it would be the second syllable, right? Is that what you came up with? All right, now what's going to happen to that stress pattern when you add the word shun to the end of that word? You don't say acceleration. What do you say? You say acceleration. Acceleration. All right, so here's what I'd like you to do. If we try this one, graduate, graduate. Where's the stress? Graduate. It's on the first syllable. Graduate. What happens when you add shun onto graduate? Graduation. Did you know that every time you add shun onto the end of a word, it shifts the syllable stress to that syllable just before the syllable shun, or that ending shun? Didn't know that outright, I bet. That's a really good indication of your statistical learning. So let's see what kind of words you can come up with. Put in the chat. What words can you come up with that follow that same pattern? You have a word, and you add shun onto the end of it, and it changes the way that you say that word. Let's see what words you can come up with in the chat box. Collaborate, collaboration, configure, configuration, celebrate, celebration. Whoa, cool. All right, so here's what we know. Timely, targeted instruction gives us a bigger boost in learning. So when we know what those developmental sequences are, what should be happening, and then we can key into those particular targets that children should be learning at the right time. All right. So here is that key concept catcher. On your key concept, here's one of those key pieces I want you to take away. Our brain changes with learning, but learning is activity dependent. In order for our neural circuits to develop, they need to be strengthened by and consistently activated over time. And those that are rarely excited, they're pruned away, and sometimes then that's a good thing. And again, children's brains do not learn passively. They need our interaction, our responsiveness, and our interaction. Socially responsive and socially interactive. So that's what I wanted to say about brain development and why words are so important. Words, words, words. So now let's go on to the next topic and what is in a word, what the structures are, and what development looks like. So we can think about words in this continuum. Learning to talk, brains are wired to learn the oral language that they are exposed to. They begin by keying into the sounds of language, and that's what young infants are doing, listening to the sounds and the words that they're loved in. And then they put those sounds together and they make words, and they put those words together and they make sentences. And then that's happening in that infant, into toddler, into preschooler, and then on into early graders and beyond. We don't ever stop developing our language, or hopefully we don't, because we're always learning some new words. And when we translate that into learning to read and write, brains must be taught to make those neural connections between what has been a foundation in oral language and now adding an element of written language, where preschoolers are learning about letters and the sounds that letters make, and then they are able to put those components together to read words, and then they put those words together to read sentences, read and write sentences, words and sentences. So here are some definitions that I like to use related to early literacy. And in any of the work that I have done, and a contemporary definition of early literacy today is that time period between birth and about age 5 to 6, when children are learning those important foundations of learning about the alphabet, learning to talk, learning vocabulary, learning a lot of elements across those learning domains. And then as they get to that point, and generally it might happen in pre-K, it often is the important curricular topic and instruction in kindergarten of teaching what a letter is, and that letter represents a speech sound. And that's the transition out of early literacy into early reading and writing, where children are keying into what the letters are, figuring out those sound combinations, the sound relationships to letters, and learning to read and write in those early stages. And that's kindergarten, first, second grade. And then as children have become more competent with the basic patterns of learning to read and learning to write, then there's another shift into that next phase of reading to learn, so that you know enough words, you're able to read enough words at a competent enough level that you can read information and learn about more things. All right, and we have folks with us today that are crossing all of those age spans. So the structures of oral language. So if you look on your key concept catcher, your graphic organizer, you'll see on one side the structures of oral language, and then on the other side of that page, the phases of development. So we're going to kind of have a parallel track in what we're describing. So the overall structures of oral language are the speech sounds, the way we pronounce words, vocabulary, the words that we pronounce, grammar, putting those words together in a sentence form, and expression, the melody that we use when we want to talk. So let's focus on speech sounds. Here's the development of how speech sounds work. So infants, birth to about age 5 months or so, babies are listening to the sounds in the words that you are saying. Then they begin to recognize what the patterns are of those sounds, and then they start keying into what some words are, understanding particular words. But what happens at about 6 to 8 months of age? babies start replicating or producing those sounds in what we call babbling. Babbling doesn't have any meaning to it. It is just word play. It's the speech sounds as a structure of oral language and the expression that babies use. You hear a baby babbling, how almost sometimes they sound like they're squealing. Right? You listen or think about what a baby might sound like. Okay. Oh, here's a little baby. Beginning around 6 to 8 months of age is when we want to see babies babbling. So how about a few cartoons as speech develops from infants into some of those next phases. So PJ still misspells most of his words when he says them. He's pretty little. He's really not misspelling them, is he? He's more mispronouncing them. And here are some general milestones for you for speech development. 2-year-olds should be saying words that if you're familiar with that 2-year-old, it should have some semblance to the word that they're trying to say. A toddler might say baba, and that's a bit away from the word bottle, but we know what baba means. 3-year-olds should be understood by those who are familiar with them. If I'm working with a family and they have a 3-year-old and the mama or the primary caregiver is not able to understand her 3-year-old, I'm going to be a little bit more concerned. 4-year-olds should be understood by the typical listener, by those understood by others. They're still learning to say some of the speech sounds. Their speech is not accurate completely yet, or is not expected to. But if you can't, as a teacher, as a care provider for a 4-year-old, if you can't understand a 4-year-old, that's a red flag. And then 5-year-olds, they're generally understood by others. They still might be learning a few sounds like R's, maybe L's, TH's, maybe that S sound that's coming too far out in front of their teeth. And by the time they're going into 1st grade, and certainly by 2nd grade, they should be saying all of the speech sounds of the language correctly. And then this gives you a little bit of a guideline on what speech sounds you can anticipate children are learning to say. Some pretty simple sounds as they are 2, adding more sounds as they are 3, and a few more sounds when they're 4, and then some of those sounds that still may be developing as they are moving into kindergarten, and then those are getting cleaned up as they're leaving kindergarten going into 1st grade. All right, how about a few more cartoons? Dolly says eating some watermelon. Well, they're called pits because when you find one in your mouth, you pit it out. Right? Look at the development, the trajectory of development of speech sounds across those early years, from about 6 months of age when they begin to babble, moving into for a year, 2 years of age, a huge jump in those toddler years of speech sound development, moving into kindergarten and on into 1st grade. And speech sound development is almost complete by the time a child enters kindergarten, and should be complete by the time a child is leaving 1st grade. Okay, that time period, 5 to 6 years, is also a really important transition from that early literacy time period that we described in our definition into that next phase of early reading and writing. So a lot of that speech sound stuff is taken care of. All right, let's look at vocabulary. What do I want to say? So how about this one? Dolly talking to little Jeffy saying, you have to keep learning lots of words so you'll have a large vocabulary. Playing with that word. And we know that there are words that we understand, our receptive vocabulary, and expressive vocabulary, the words that we can say, the words that we know and say. And generally, receptive vocabulary develops before expressive vocabulary use, and your words count. And the unfamiliar words that children don't know are really, really important to share with them. So what we know across from a science perspective, classrooms where teachers are using high-level vocabulary those children are gaining bigger vocabularies, and it is impacting their reading and their writing. So should you be using big words with your little friends? Shake your heads. Yes, lots of big words. We also have to use words that they understand and help them understand those big words that we're using, but big words are really important. How about this little Trixie that love cartoons? And you're thinking about vocabulary. She says, I have a lot on my mind. I just can't get it to come out of my mouth. Maybe that's why my head is so big, because she's building a lot of those words, figuring out what they are. Or how about this one? Dennis and his little friend Joey at the bowling alley. Don't throw it, Joey, roll it. That's why it's called a rolling alley. How many of you have funny stories about words that children have said in a context that they've kind of learned a little bit about it, but it's not quite on target? Or this one, Dennis, big boss Dennis, and they're making cookies, he and Joey. And Margaret says to bake cookies, you have to separate 3 eggs. So put them about a foot apart. with his understanding of what separate means. All right. How about Jeffy? He asks his dad, he's got a book there. He's asks, what's a rivet? Or Billy asks that, and Jeffy pipes up in his little preschool voice, well, that's what a frog says. So in Jeffy's little mind, he heard rivet, but what does he understand about that? Doesn't know rivet. He knows something that's kind of close, which is ribbit. All right, so here's how development takes place. So from babbling, there's that one word stage that babies are using. Now the words that babies are, or the sounds babies are saying, they turn about 1 on average is when the first word stage emerges. Now those sounds have a meaning. And here's how those first words look. About 50% of them are nouns. They're labels for things because a label is the most primary construct of something. And about 14% are the names of the people that are familiar to them. And about 13% are actions like eat or drink. And about 8% are personal social kinds of things. Hi, another very popular social word is no, no. So that's how words develop, and that generally is what the first words contain. And look at the explosion of vocabulary. A baby says his or her first word at about 8 to 14 months, with that average being about 12 months. But it is a wide range. And then they grow a vocabulary of about 50 words. That's a key point. When children have a bank of vocabulary words that's broaching about 50, that's when they get to go to the next step in the language development process of putting words together. And then a huge explosion between 18 and 24 months to about 24 to 30 months. And then another big explosion between that second year and third year. And by the time children are coming to kindergarten, they're on average should be saying about 2,000 words. Huge explosion. And look at that trajectory across that infant, that first year of life into the second year of life. And see, though, you preschool teachers, how important vocabulary development is. That trajectory continues through and across our lifespan. All right, and again, there's that transition in that 5-year to 6-year time period between early literacy and early reading and writing. All right, here's another little query for us. So very quickly, let's think of all of the interesting words you can think of for the word big. And post your word in the chat box. Humongous. So Lindsay has a funny story. Her daughter asked if a buck was a bad word. No, it's a deer. So another word, buck. I had a yatty buck on my yag. A yatty buck on my yag. One of those little things with red spots and black dots, or red with black dots, right? Okay, we have enormous, gigantic, tremendous, humongous, grande, large, giant. Mhm. Lots of big words that we can use. And when we use those words and pair them with the word big, because young children learn that word pretty quickly, then they have all that exposure to all of those other new words. Great. Okay, again, words count, and unfamiliar words are really, really important. All right, so now let's take a look at grammar. So grammar is putting words together into sentences. How about a few cartoons? Jeffrey says, "Do I talk gooder now that I growed up?" He's got some statistical learning, because when you talk about something that's a little bit more, you add an ER ending to it. And there he growed, he's got that ED ending as well. All right, so here's some grammar activities. So think about these sentences. Grammar entails the rules that we use to put sentences into a proper order. A more technical term for that is called syntax. And into the proper form, or the proper form of the word, which is called morphology. When we added shun onto the end of any of those words that you put in the chat box, we were taking a word, a vocabulary word, adding an ending to it, and adding a morpheme, which changed the form of that word. All right, so put those bigger, the, was, ladder into an order that makes sense, into a grammatical form. And I bet, raise your hand, okay? Raise your hand in the reaction. As a reaction, go to the participants and find yes or no. Yes, if you put those words into this order, the ladder was bigger. Few of you are. Let's see a few more. Is that what you said? Yep, raising your hand, giving a yes. Seeing a lot of those. Great. Now, is there another way that we can shift those words to make another sentence? Aha, Elaine says, was the ladder bigger? So you shifted them around, and that's a syntactic move that we use in English to make a question type of sentence. Okay, how about the next one? How many of you started, okay, I'm going to clear these. How many of you started out with a ball, or started out with the word, here's the question I want to ask. How many of you started out with the word give? Give a ball to him. Now that one was a little trickier than the other one, because there's no main subject at the very beginning of that sentence, because that subject is implied. Yeah, okay, how about the next one? I ask this of my husband all the time. What, you mean you don't have it? Where is your cell phone? How about starting with the word where? Your cell phone is where? Okay. All right, so that's grammar. So let's put these together in some grammar forms. I'm just checking where we're at, because we want to get to our break, which we're going to have pretty quickly. Okay, so he gave the ball to him, but I bet we have a lot of friends who will say him give the ball to him. Here's one mouse. Over there are two mice. They like or likes to play a game. You know that pretty readily because of your statistical learning. She likes to read. She is winding the clock. Yesterday, she winded the clock. A lot of our friends would say that, wound the clock. And you can unwind after work, unless you're participating in a webinar. All right. All right, so longer sentences, go to the two-word stage, combining longer sentences. How about this little friend? She has a glass and she says, "Do peas?" She's probably saying, "I want some juice, please." Putting two words together to impart her meaning. We saw that one with Jeffy now, again. And how about this? "How I'm coloring and I'm scissoring." Those funny ways that young friends learn to say words based on that statistical learning. Here is a very quick summary of, or continuum of young children's sentence structure in English, of children putting words together in short phrases. And if kids aren't yet putting together words by the time they're 30 months of age, that's a big red flag. 2 to 3-year-olds, older 2s and 3s, are putting those endings on words like plurals and ing endings and ed endings. They should be putting 3 to 6 words together. 4-year-olds should string a lot of words together and combine sentences that are related to the same topic. And 5-year-olds carry on a conversation with mostly grammatically correct sentences. And that is just going to continue until the complexity of language, the basic structure is there as children are leaving pre-K going into kindergarten. The basic structures of oral language are in place. What's going to continue to grow is the complexity of language, shifting from basic sentences into more compound and complex sentences, and increased vocabulary. And look at that trajectory of how the sentence length grows in young children. And by the time children get to be about 4 years of age, then the sentence length is not as much of a key indicator because of the complexity that may be embedded into a relatively short sentence, or because of the simpleness that might be included in a run-on sentence. Like a good example of a run-on sentence that's really, really long could be, I like my mommy, and I like my daddy, and I like my dog, and I like my sister, and I like my brother, and I like you, and I like a really long sentence, but it's not very complex. Okay, so one more, the melody of language. And it is so, so important for us to use a lot of expression as we are talking, because it imparts a lot of meaning for young children. So it's the rhythm and the stress, the intonation of what it is that we say. So say this word like you mean it. Say no like you mean it. No. Say it like it's a question. No? Say it like someone didn't quite get it. No? So each one of those has a different meaning, even though it is the very same word. Depending on how you say something, it changes the meaning of what you actually wanted to say. Okay? All right, so just a quick one. Say this sentence with a pause after the word eat. This is my granddaughter. Let's eat, Grandma. Okay, now say the sentence with no pauses between the words. No! Pauses or commas save lives. All right, and then one other stage of oral language development that I want to share with you from longer sentences, and this is a very critical element and connection to literacy, and that is a children's awareness and understanding that words have a meaning, which develops first, but they also have a word structure, and that words also have a structure that you can play with. So my granddaughter wanted to play, she was writing a list the other day of groceries, and she said, apple, apple. She knows what an apple is, and she was playing with the structure of the word. And then right after that, she told her mama that she wanted to play with the puzzle. She knows what a puzzle is, and she's playing with the structure of that word. My daughter's thought was, oh, you've been spending too much time with Grandma. All right, word structure and word meaning. Look at this little friend named Bob. I can say my name frontwards and backwards. Let's get your fingers ready and say Bob. Ready? B, A, B. Now say it backwards. B, A, B. He's so proud about that. And this stage is the foundation for phonological awareness and wordplay. And we know how critical phonological awareness is in the literacy learning process. All right, so we have one little poll for us, and then let me back up a little bit, okay? And then we're gonna take a break while you are doing your poll. All right, so here's kind of a review of all of this. Here's what infants should do. They should be babbling by 6 to 8 months, but if an infant is not babbling by 12 months of age, big red flag. They should gesture and point by 12 months. Again, if they're not doing that, big red flag. And they should say single words at least by 16 months of age. If they don't have any single words by 16 months of age, we want to be keying into it. Toddlers should be saying words that are pretty understandable to the care provider. You know what it is. It may not be articulated correctly, but you can tell what it is a lot of the time. Toddlers should be saying new words all of the time, building that explosion of vocabulary, and then putting two words together in some spontaneous combinations by 24 months. Not imitations, but spontaneous combinations. And preschoolers should say words that are pretty understandable. If you're not understanding them, then that's a big red flag as well. Preschoolers should understand most of what is said to them. They should say new words all the time. They should be able to combine a number of words together. They should also be able to combine some events that occur. So being able to tell a narrative or something that happened, 3 events to 5 events across those preschool years. And then those early graders, they should say words that are correctly articulated or are correctly pronounced. They should understand complex sentences. They should be able to use grammatically correct sentences or grammatically correct words in their sentences. And now their narratives have shifted from being able to relate events to now being able to combine some complex events of cause and effect, with a beginning and a middle and an end to what their stories are, with some episodes and resolution. All right, so we're going to take a break. I have a timer that I'm going to put on, and here is a poll that I want you to participate in. Okay, so I'm going to get this poll launched, and then I'll put the timer on, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes. All right? If you have any questions, please let us know. What this poll is going to be is what language structure is still developing in these examples of what a child might say to you. All right, so I'm looking forward to your responses. And here's a little timer. 10 minutes. Let me get this in a shorter, smaller direction for us, smaller size. All right, questions that you have in the chat box, we'll be monitoring those, and take a little stretch break once you have your poll completed, okay? All right. We are coming back together. Give me a yes if you are all the way back, if you're back with us. A reaction in the chat box. Yes, yes, yes. I love to see those X's. Checks. Great. Not yet. Okay, coming back. Great. Okay. So let's look at this poll. I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you. So awesome job. Way to go. So a little friend said, him go to the store. He doesn't have that correct pronoun yet. So that is absolutely grammar. Good work. A child says, and this one's a little bit tricky. A child says, the grass is blue, which isn't actually accurate. And so it could be that they were teasing, or it could be that they don't quite know yet what some of those color words are, making that connection. So that might be a better related to vocabulary, which is what most of you thought. How about this one? A child says, go now, where really that child wants to ask a question, and you got that one as an expression. The expression or the way of saying that sentence as a question wasn't quite there. And then a little friend saying, go in a tar, do in a tar, do in a tar. How many of you have little friends who are doing that? It's okay for 2-year-olds. 3-year-olds should be figuring it out, and surely by 4, they should be driving in a car and not a tar. Okay, so good work on all of that. I hope that was a good review for you. So I have to stop sharing. Okay. Can't just close the poll out. I have to stop sharing. Otherwise, you just get to keep on seeing it. All right. So back from our break, and everything looks like it's on target. So we've talked about why words are so important for brain development. There's a lot that is occurring through statistical learning. And then what is vocabulary, or what are those structures of oral language that we talked about with the sounds and vocabulary and grammar and expression? Now let's see what we can do and how these strategies match up with what you're already using and doing in your settings. So some word building strategies for language and literacy learning. And I'm just checking with our time here. Okay, good. So learning to talk. This is a repeat of that slide with infants, toddlers, and preschoolers, and learning to write. What's happening as preschoolers are keying into the letters, and then kinders are making good connections between letters and sounds, and then moving early graders into putting words together into longer sentences, both with reading and writing. But let's take a look at foundations for learning to read and write. So the sound awareness that babies and toddlers are doing, early preschoolers, that sound awareness to speech sounds are a very important foundation for phonological awareness, and then leading to phoneme awareness, which is absolutely a vital skill set needed for learning, for reading and writing. Word awareness is needed for decoding and spelling. So the bigger vocabularies, the more vocabulary you have, and the more familiar you are with words, the easier it is to read them and to write them. And then sentence awareness, you put words together into sentences, and understanding those sentences is so important for then being able to understand the sentences that you are reading and know how you want to put words together when you want to write some kind of composition. So an easy connection to those important foundations that occur in the oral language phases. So, and it's like missed an animation. Preschoolers moving into kinders, moving into early graders, as those sequences of development as children are keying into in that written language form. And once again, in order for children to build this understanding, our guidance, our facilitation, our instruction is absolutely vital in order for kids to get it. Okay, so here's a new learning that I have, and I was going to grab that book. Actually, I'm going to do it so you can see it. Let's see. How we learn. This is one of the newer reads that I have come upon. Stanislas Dehaene. He is a neuropsychologist, a neuroscientist, and his life's work has been on how do we learn. And he, in his latest book, has these 4 pillars of learning. In order to learn something, and think about your children, you have to have focused attention. I'm so grateful for those of you who have your cameras on, because I can see what you're doing. I can get your feedback. I love it when you laugh at something that I've said that's funny. If I say something funny and you don't laugh, then I'm thinking, there was a private joke, or that didn't work. So thank you for that. Focused attention. Another piece is active engagement. So in this kind of learning experience, we have some engagement, and we're trying to make it as social as we can in this opportunity. And that's why we have all of these other things that we can do in order to help your engagement by with our polls and with the graphic organizer and with all of those things that we do. And here's another important one: error feedback. Kids need to know what their response is. They need good feedback from us about how it is that they are doing. And so when we've done a poll, I want to chat about what those correct responses are, so that if there was a different response that you had, it's a shift to, oh, okay, so that I can see where that would be. And being able to then accommodate or shift what it was that we have done. If we have made an error, or if we've had another response, or it's also confirming, yep, okay, that's what I know, I'm on target. And then here's an important one: a cycle of daily rehearsal, practice, 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 and really importantly, nightly consolidation. Think about our little friends who may not have a very structured home environment, and they don't have a good sleep routine. And they come to us at school, and they may be tired and exhausted because they stayed up watching screens, or they stayed up late and didn't get a good night's rest. That's not going to be very valuable for their learning that next day. And what happens when you are sleeping? Your brain is really, really active while you are sleeping. It doesn't go to sleep either. It is active, and it is working on those things that you have been thinking about, those things that you experienced the day before in a recent event, and trying to put all that information together. And that is why young children, with the brain development that is occurring when they're so little, they need long hours of sleep. Even into the grades in middle school, even into high school, the amount of sleep that students need, that our children need, is pretty is significant, and it is really important. Okay, so here is a poll for you. I think I have this as a poll. Yes. Think about the best contexts for literacy learning. What facilitates young children's literacy learning best? Is it teacher-child modulated learning? Is it child-child modulated learning, where children are teaching each other? Or is it child modulated learning, where the child is learning something on his or her own? All right, so those 3 queries. We'll go to the next poll, and let's see what you think about this kind of experience. Watching. Checking in with that poll. I'm going to get a few more. Teacher-child modulated learning, child-child modulated learning, children learning on their own. Okay, we're getting close to a lot of you. Majority of you are answering. All right, and here's what the results are. Teacher-child modulated learning. That's exactly what the correct answer is, and what the science is supporting. We help build a foundation for what children need to learn, and then we can help them practice their learning and deepen their learning with that child-to-child modulated learning. But our jobs as teachers, as their guides, their facilitators, is really important. Okay, so I shared the results. Stop the sharing and then stop the poll. Okay, so let's see. Oh, how we learn. Stanless DeWan. I'm looking at the chat box. Thank you. Great read. Okay, so here's where that study comes from. Connor, a very well-reputed researcher, fortunately no longer with us, but teacher-child modulated learner is much more effective than child modulated learning or child modulated learning. And we know that the valuable experiences that we provide for our children, those valuable experiences occur when we guide children, when we give them the tools that they need so that they can make their child guided learning experiences more valuable. So there's this I do, we do, you do learning strategy. Anita Archer, who coined that phrase. I do as the teacher, I'm going to model this for you. We do, I'm going to watch what you get to do and make sure that you're doing it okay. And then you do is where that child-child modulated learning is going to be really valuable. And we can think about learning. Here's another connection to that statistical learning piece that we talked about earlier in our first session. So explicit instruction that we do is the tip of the iceberg. It is that I do piece where we are showing, modeling, demonstrating, teaching how to do something. And then we want to watch how children are doing it so that we can provide that really important guided practice. And then with that important guided practice, can lead to the you do, where children then have enough information that they can practice that particular skill or whatever it is that we want them to learn. In that submerged section, which is actually which is a larger context across their learning, across their time. And what Seidenberg says, another really valuable researcher, is it's almost a semi-supervised within an implicit experience. We provide really good instruction, and then that underneath the water of the iceberg piece is where a lot of that is consolidating, but we still need to watch how children are progressing and learning. All right, so talk matters. Do you know how many words young children need to hear every day in order to build that foundation of oral language to move into literacy and learning, literacy learning? 20,000 words a day. Our words are really important. So how do we get to 20,000? Not that we can provide 20,000 words in our educational settings, but between us and between all children's caregivers and the interactions that children have, we can add a lot. So I love this slogan from the 30 Million Word Project of tune in, 3 T's, tune in, talk more, and take turns. And there are these interactive, child-directed conversations from responsive care providers, caregivers, where we respond to children's queries and their questions and help them understand how language works. They're vital to children's development and their learning. And child-directed language is one of those elements of the way that we talk to kids that helps their brains learn. It has a lot of expression to it. There's a positive tone to it. Child-directed language does not use incorrect pronunciation or incorrect grammar, and it draws an important attention, one of those pillars of learning, to what is being said, who's saying it, and encouraging children to attend. Another really important, attend, engage, and interact. Important pillars that we talked about in Duan's 4 pillars of learning. All right, so with speech development, we want to make sure that we are speaking our own words very clearly so that children are hearing them accurately. We want to make sure we understand and know which speech sounds are present in the children that we are working with who are English language learners. as well as the speech sounds that are present in children who have a different dialect than the dialect of school. When I think about Spanish dialect, how many of you have children who are native Spanish speakers? So Spanish is their home dialect. Or children, as I look at some of the webcams here, I wonder if you have children who are using an African American dialect. And in that dialect, there are differences in speech sounds that are part of our school dialect, which is the dialect of literacy learning. And so for teachers, we need to understand and know what those are, what those differences are, so that we can help children learn, honor, and celebrate the dialect, the language that they are loved in, and code shift to the dialect of school. So we want to help children learn to pronounce all of the sounds, and we want to help children learn the words that are not familiar to them. So tuning in and talking more and taking turns is a really important aspect of what it is that we do. And when we tune into what a child is doing, it is a way for us to help know what children are telling us, help children help follow their lead for what it is that they need from us. And that's a really important way of thinking about tuning in, is following a child's lead. And that child's lead tells us what they need from us so that we can guide them to help guide them to where they need to go. So here are some strategies that we want to do. And one is self-talk. That's I'm going to describe how to do something. And then there's parallel talk. I'm going to describe what it is that you are doing in this new learning that we have had. So self-talk is kind of like it is the I do piece. And it's kind of like the cooking show host, where I'm going to describe how to make this delicious and scrumptious recipe. I'm modeling a new learning for you. So it's the I do. And then if we had the opportunity, I could show you while you are making that new delicious recipe, and I could describe what you are doing. But parallel talk, if we put that into another context, it's the we do piece, where we are describing what a child is doing. It's kind of like the sports announcer that's describing what is happening in the environment. And it is guiding children's learning, making sure that what it is that we have taught and they now get to participate in that new learning, that it's developing in a way that we want it to develop. So that's building receptive language. Let's look at building expressive language. And we use these strategies all the time. Talking about them on a more conscious level helps us understand, or helps us be more intentional in using these strategies. So one is a recast, and that occurs when a child has said something that's not exactly correct. And what we can do in a recast is repeat what that child has said in a confirming way. I understand what you have said, but also in a correct way. Providing that model for what's going to help that child learn to say that particular structure in a more accurate manner. And then another strategy is expansion. Some people call it extension. So it's when we add more information or more grammar, either grammar, make it more complex if it was fairly simple, or more vocabulary to make that child's utterance more complex. Okay, so this is another one of those key concepts for your graphic organizer. And here's a kicker. So make a little star, because it's not just about modeling for children what we want children to do. So that would be the I do. We want children to do is the we do. Have children say that sentence again. So for little Jeffy, here's this cartoon yet for a third time. Jeffy says, do I talk gooder now that I growed up? A potential recast for little Jeffy. What could a recast be? He said gooder and he said growed. So we want to say that sentence back to him, confirming that we understand what it was that he said. So we might say, yes, you talk better now that you grew up, or you have grown up. So the kicker is, now we want him to say, you tell me that again. Tell me that again. Okay. So how about this? I think we're going to put this into, so how about this? Just going to say these really quickly, looking at where we're at with our time. So a little friend said, him do it, and him do it, and him do it. What is the word that is not accurate in that sentence? The word him. And what we want to do is replace it with the correct word he. So what would the recast be? Yeah, he does it, he does it, and he does it. And then you say, tell me that again. How about this one? This little friend said, her run really fast. So what is a recast for that? She ran really fast. And the kicker is, tell me that again. How about this one? A child says 1, 2, 4, 5. Oh, you're counting. You tell me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the kicker is, tell me that again. How about this one? What you doing? And the recast is, oh, what are you doing? Tell me that again. What are you doing? So those little pieces don't take very much time, and they're so important for managing, for helping kids build their language. So those are recasts. How about some expansions? So expand these utterances by just a little bit. So this is really valuable for you preschool teachers and toddlers, for toddlers and preschoolers. And a little kid says, a dog a bone. Not quite a complete sentence yet. Expand that a little bit. Oh, I gave a dog a bone. Could be that. Okay, now expand it by a lot. I gave a dog a bone and he ate it all up. Okay, how about she fall down? Here's an example of a recast and an expansion. She fell down on the ground. Now, expand it by a lot. Yeah, okay. Okay, we're gonna skip this. Okay, that's for infant, toddler, preschoolers. Now let's think about this for your kindergarten, first, second, even older graders. And it is taking 2 short sentences and having them combine them into 1 long sentence. So here are some examples. So you can think about the boy was thirsty, the boy drank lemonade. Make that sentence, combine that sentence with the word and. The boy was thirsty and he drank some lemonade. Combine that sentence with the word because. The boy drank lemonade because he was thirsty. How about this next one? The weather was perfect. The girls were playing soccer. Combine those sentences with the word when. And I bet you said when the weather was perfect, the girls were playing soccer. All right, so that is a strategy. We can do that. We can begin to do that with kids are little. But this is a really valuable strategy when kids are older in helping to expand their oral language. Important for, very important for literacy development as well, and in writing compositions. Okay, so here is the importance of taking turns in conversation. The power of language for brain development has so much to do with that conversational turn taking. And it's more than just the words that children hear, but it is that back and forth that we want to see in our interactions with the children in our care. So young children who have experienced more of that interactive turn taking in conversations, they show a lot more engagement key pillar. Show a lot more attention. Another key pillar to learning, to those who are listening to voices and listening to stories. And in the flesh, talk really matters. And I think about our context today and where we're at with screens and hybrid learning and those things that we're doing. You are working on so conscientiously and trying to make that learning the best that it can be. And this in-person piece is a really important element to make this screen interaction as best and most interactive as we can. So you hear these slogans of serve and return. I say something, you say something, return it, serve it, return it, and strive for 5. So that there are 5 serve and returns back and forth, where I say something, you say something, I say something, you say something, up to 5 turns. It takes less than 30 seconds to do that. And that's what this activity was. But because I've talked so much, we're not going to be able to do this activity. A 30-second conversation. Try it with some of your friends and just see how many turns you can get in a 30-second conversation. And what this activity does is it nurtures active engagement in conversation. It nurtures oral language. It nurtures children's self-esteem. You know that you're keying into and tuning into what they are. It builds your relationship with little kids. And do that and see what kinds of changes you notice in children's responsiveness. That strive for 5 conversation, and it only takes a little bit of time. Okay, so a few quick elements of what we can do to engage conversation. We want to show your interest. You get down on that child's eye level and you make eye contact with them and you talk about what a child is doing right now. You use information talk. Oh, I noticed that you're doing this. Oh, look at that cool thing you have on your shirt. And you use wait time. When you ask a question, count to 5 inside your head so that you give children a chance to respond before you ask the next question or you have the next prompt or the next comment that you have. Because if we fill all the space talking, kids don't have an opportunity to fill the space. We want them to as well. So a quick element of what the difference is between spoken language and written language. Spoken language is much less complex, less concise, and written language is really long, complex, and more syntactically or grammatically precise. And so that leads us to another very important concept of interactive storybook reading. So a real quick preview or overview of what interactive storybook reading is. We want to select really valuable books that have rich oral language, have a lot of vocabulary that children are not familiar with, and that gives us the opportunity to create definitions that children can log into. And with that definition, we want to have a gesture that goes along with it. And then we read the book with our definitions, the vocabulary, target vocabulary words, and the definitions with our gestures, and reread that book. We talk about a 3-read experience. 3 is just kind of a target, but it's not an absolute. And we want to reread that book as many times as children need in order to help them expand on and deepen what it is that they already know. And so when we pick out new vocabulary, we want to make sure that it's in the context where that vocabulary lives. We want to directly point to objects or display pictures when appropriate that relate to that vocabulary. And the key one again is supporting new words with gestures, and repeat that information as review information and repeat information as frequently as possible or as needed. And so I have a quick explicit vocabulary routine for you. And it is 3 steps to a vocabulary routine. You come upon a new word and you want to say that word in a context so that children can see where that word lives. So you have an unfamiliar word, you have children repeat it. And then you want to provide a child-friendly definition for that word with a gesture. And then you want to show other contexts for where that word also, what it also might be. And then you want to have children describe that word to a neighbor. So let's try one. I'm going to share a new word with you. It's the word kineem. You say it, kineem. Kineem. A kineem is a gesture that connects to a concept. Tell your neighbor. A kineem is use the gesture, a gesture that connects to a concept. That gesture piece is one that we're learning through cognitive science that makes such an important difference in children's learning. The gesture is important. Okay, so there's another little strategy for us. And when we read the same book over and over and over, children use more language. They are able to respond to questions in more complex ways, and they gain a much greater understanding and a control of what that reading process is. So, here are our learning objectives today. So we wanted to describe the structures of oral language and the stages of language development. Check, got that done. We wanted to describe those language foundations that are needed for written language development. And talking about how sounds turn into that foundation for phonemic awareness. Words and vocabulary tune into that understanding of what reading and writing need. Sentences turn into comprehension and composition, and words, sounds, and sentences. And we talked about a few strategies of how you can, and things probably I bet you're already doing, and just on a more conscious level, helps us to be even more intentional in the words that we use, the way that we use words, and helping children build really important foundations in their learning. So here's a little piece of homework for you. Try this the next time you read a children's storybook. Look at that storybook that you plan to read with your children. Make a list of all those unfamiliar words and select a few of those words, those key words. Create some child-friendly definitions for those words with your gesture, or what's your new word? Remember? Kineem. And then for fun, in your book, find the longest sentence. See how many words it is. I wonder if you're going to be surprised about that. And then read that children's book to your little friends using the vocabulary teaching routine and the strategies that we talked about. Notice children's reaction. Okay, so just some few key points. Social responsiveness, social interactions. Very important. Words, words, words. Be the cooking host, the cooking show host. Be the sportscaster to narrate the experiences of what's going on in your classroom or your agency or your setting, wherever you are working with your young friends. And have children use more complex language with your guidance. And those are going to build really important foundations for literacy learning. Because remember, our job is to deepen our understanding of the processes that are involved in children's learning so we can do our best job ever. So talk, talk, talk. Words matter. So I want to thank you so much for your participation, and I hope that you're taking with you a few little things that will have made it worth your while spending these 2 hours with us. And I want to share one more. Here's my contact information, and thank you from my granddaughter. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Paulson. You've made it very clear that oral language development is critical for building the foundation of early language and literacy. On behalf of the Deal Center, we would like to thank you for sharing your expertise and offering practical strategies that can be implemented to enhance daily instruction and develop proficient readers, because that's our mission in Georgia. And I'd like to thank all of our participants for joining us tonight. It's been a great learning experience. I encourage all of you to join us in November as we continue on our Science of Reading journey. And I'm going to leave you with a quote that I heard several weeks ago. Talk might be cheap, but it's priceless for developing minds. So thank you all for joining us. And I'd like to introduce Garrett Cook, the Deal Center's Research Associate. And Dr. Paulson, we need to give him we need to turn his mic on so he can talk.
Okay.
His name is Garrett Cook.
All right.
And Garrett is the Deal Center's Research Associate. And Garrett's going to give you a few more details regarding the survey. So Garrett, I'm going to turn it over to you as soon as your mic is on.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, awesome. So as Amy said, my name is Garrett Cook and I'm a research associate at the Deal Center. At the Deal Center, we operate through a model of continuous improvement, meaning that we're always striving to do better. A huge part of this process is gathering your feedback from today's event. With that being said, I will be putting a link in the chat box for a short survey about your experience today. This survey is going to remain open for exactly 1 week. So survey responses that are not completed by the evening of October 20th will not be counted. As part of the survey, you will be asked to provide information about how to contact you, like your name, your email address, and your mailing address. And those will also be required for CEU credit. I would also like to reiterate that CEU credit will not be granted without the completion of this survey. So please make sure you get it done as soon as you can. If you all have any questions about the survey, please reach out to me. I'm going to be giving you all my email address as well as the phone number to the Deal Center in the chat box. Other than that, though, y'all have a great evening, and thanks for your time and your efforts today.
So Garrett, this is Lucy. You're going to put those links in the chat box right now, so people will need to copy that link. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I'm just about to drop that in there for y'all. So there's the survey link. And then I'm about to send y'all my email address.
So it looks like it's hyperlinked, so you should just be able to click on that and it will take you right to it. And then what is the format of the survey? Is it a website or is it it's a
Qualtrics survey.
Okay, great.
Right, and actually, Amy brought up a good point to me earlier today. If any of y'all feel the need to capture any type of confirmation that you completed the survey, there is a message that appears on your screen at the very end that basically thanks you for participating in the survey. If y'all could screenshot that, then in the event, which is unlikely that you would lose your survey progress or anything, that could be your little receipt. And here is the phone number to the Deal Center also. I'm about to send that to you guys. So there you go. And again, if y'all have any questions at all, just feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Garrett. And this concludes our session tonight. Like I said, we're going to hang on for just a few minutes so it makes sure everybody gets the link for the survey, and we will close out around 7:30. So
great.
And thank you. And thank you, Dr. Paulson.
You're welcome. Thank you to all of you. And I wish and hope that you all stay well and that we are going to survive and thrive in this very interesting educational year that we are in. So thank you so much for what it is that you do. You are superpower. You are superheroes to me.
I just want to hold that little baby. You read that too.
Come back and do letters training, early childhood letters. So even if we can't do it in person, we can do it virtually. Got that figured out. And for those of you who are still on, who are working with infants and toddlers, if you're not familiar with Letters for Early Childhood Educators, it's just a deepening our colleagues' understanding of the foundations in early literacy. And one of my next writing tasks is going to be a companion piece for infants and toddlers, teachers of infants and toddlers, or care providers. Those things that we need to know. And you can bet there's going to be a lot of language that's involved. A lot of language. Yeah.
Do you have an expected completion date of that? You have
No,
nothing else to do.
no. I have another publication that I think I'm about 95% done and ready to send in. And then I've got one more before that one, and then, so maybe in the next year or so, I hope.
Okay, I'm gonna keep it up for about 3 more minutes and then we're gonna shut it down. Dr. Paulson, I believe everybody's had time to access the link because once they open it, it's in another window. So
Okay.
thanks again. I've enjoyed working with you. I hope that we'll work with you again soon at the Dill Center. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for everything, and we will keep in touch.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All righty.
Take
Enjoy
care,
your-
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.